Welcome to this episode of The Homefulness Show, where I interview Zahra Lightway, who's a friend of mine, to learn about eco-villages through her recent tour to a lot of eco-villages in Australia, India, and Europe. I believe eco-villages can be a blueprint for building thriving and resilient and sustainable communities. In fact, I became an eco-village ambassador with the Global Eco-Village Network after attending the month-long immersive EcoVillage Design Education in 2012, which was held on an eco-village in South Africa. I participated in a lot of activities to understand what it takes to make a successful eco-village, such as governance and decision-making, economic sustainability, and social cohesion. We talk about sociocracy as a method of governance and decision-making that a lot of them use. We talk about what sets them apart, for instance, around shared leadership, resource management, community resilience, and what is the difference between an eco-estate and an eco-village, where an eco-estate would be like a neighborhood that values sustainability, and an eco-village being really mission-driven. And how we can finance eco-villages in the startup phase, which is where a lot of startup groups run into problems. We learn about a very interesting organization or method of finance called Les Passages, where whether people have assets and money or people have skills and talents, all of it is valued through this model. The positive things about eco-villages is that it doesn't necessarily reject, or it's not trying to run away from what doesn't work in society, but it does create a positive model or a way forward in all the different systems such as education, finance, food, social systems, housing, and so on. What I like about eco-villages is that they are very mission-focused rather than just complaining about what's not working. In this episode, Zahra mentions about her work as a vision catalyst with the Neighborgood Project, which is a startup eco-villages looking to purchase land in the top of the South Island, not far from where I live. So she talks a little bit about Neighborgood. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can go to neighborgood.earth. And if you're keen to see images and hear more from another guest that I interviewed, I made a video a while back where I interviewed Rabina McCurdy on the Common Ground YouTube channel. You can go to the show notes to find that URL, or you can go to the Common Ground YouTube channel and search around Eco-Village development. If you are living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, 2 events to know about. We are having the Women Revolutionizing Housing Hui, 6th to the 8th of November. This is for any woman that is interested in housing in any way as a professional, working as, for instance, in the built environment as an architect or builder and engineer, women who are working with a not-for-profit housing provider, women who are developers, women who are leading some interesting project or initiative with housing, or who's driving housing policy or addressing issues like affordability or homelessness. All women are welcome to learn and network with each other. So visit the website at Common Ground and you'll see Women Revolutionizing Housing Hui. Check out more information there and sign up on the wait list so you get notified when we have our registrations open. And the other one to check out, the Housing Innovation Society. They are advancing what's called the collective housing sector, which is housing that is focused on the residents' opportunity to participate in the co-design and development, as well as the ongoing management of the neighborhoods in which they want to live. Well, we're ready to get into the episode with Zahra Lightway. Welcome, Zahra. So great to have you on the show. Our topic today is your Eco-Village Exploration Tour, which took you from where you live in New Zealand to Australia, to India, to Europe is where you spend a lot of your time. Return now to New Zealand. Give us the highlights of what you found most interesting. What are some of the best practices and maybe some red flags we need to know that they've learned that we don't need to repeat. And I know that this comes from your personal interest in living in an eco-village way.
For a long time, I wasn't interested in living in community because I wanted it to live my own way. I didn't want to interfere with other people's needs and so on. But over the last 6 years of being in New Zealand, I realized, no, I do want community. I want to be part of community. I set an intention a long time ago about co-creating a worldwide network of learning environments that would be a Lightway village. That was
Mm.
part of my journey into founding a school in the US. And that was before I was getting involved with Neighbor. And I thought, aha, this is the vision, a vision of a village of 150 odd people. And so then one thing led to another. And I've been on the fast track of learning how to be in community and how to be adaptable and share space with people. It's been a beautiful, challenging time of rapid growth and expansion. It's been amazing.
And so that leads us into the topic we're discussing today, which is your exploration tour. You
Mm.
decided you wanted to visit a whole bunch of different eco villages. Can you tell us why that was so important to you? What was your purpose? What were you trying to achieve within those 9 months?
The tour itself came out of my work with Neighborhood, with that startup. I wanted a lot more experience of seeing how the communities were getting started, what's happening in Australia, across Europe, somewhat in India, and get a real pulse for the movement, what's really working and what's not necessarily working, or what makes the difference between a village startup being successful and what doesn't. And also to see any innovation in the space. So at Neighborhood, by the time I went on the tour, I'd been leading the project as the vision catalyst for about a year. I already knew you have to have foundational pieces in place before you just buy land and start living there. So right off the bat, that rarely works. Just a group of people, they get together, they go, let's buy some land and live together, and don't put in the social structures and foundations necessary. For example, how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to resolve conflicts or disagreements or just different points of view when that comes up, which of course they will, because human beings aren't robots. So we're all a bit different. The lack of those things and lack of economic planning tend to be the biggest things that cause a community startup to not happen.
Mm.
So we put a lot of that in place and did a good job of it. I knew a lot about sociocracy. That was one of the big pieces that I brought to the project as well. Yeah.
Sociocracy, just in summary, being a more flat-based decision-making system. It can be quite complex if it's a large organization, but simply it's that not all decisions are made by one group. There's subgroups that make other decisions, and there's a connection between sort of a centralized decision-making group and these subgroups, and there's a way of transferring that
Yeah.
information and decision-making between them.
The only word I would call out there is the idea of there being a centralized decision-making group. The whole thing about sociocracy is to decentralize decision
Okay.
making, and it has amazing tools for creating policy and making decisions and so forth that are very useful that we've used to write the Living Manifesto, write the Constitution, like a lot of pieces that are really pivotal, creating the conflict transformation process. So yeah, basically it's a governance model based in nature's principles that works with
Mm.
circles and shared decision making and consent, which we won't get into, but
Mm.
consent and consensus are two different things. And
Mhm.
consent is
Mhm.
far more effective and efficient.
Mhm.
So that seems to
Mhm.
be one of the more common models for decision making in the eco-village movement. So most of them offer week-long experiences
Mm.
that are courses that are either on a specific topic or aspect of their village or introduction to the village and so
Mm.
on. And those are very helpful. And I did learn a lot from them. They're not cheap, but it's also a way that the communities create income. And
Mm.
often most of their income, like Tamara Eco Village in Portugal, which is one of the most long-lived ones, I think it was 70 or 80% of their yearly income.
So you set up your 9-month tour to
Yeah.
mostly have these kinds of experiences. Were you paid to be able to learn and be fed? I'm assuming accommodation, food was included in that.
Yeah. But the prices in Europe for a week of course, food and accommodation varied between 6 and 800 euros for the week.
What would you say might be some of the themes you saw that eco-villages were doing well? I heard social systems and economic systems were the things that sustained them if they had those before
Yeah.
everybody started living on the land. What are those social and economic systems that you thought worked well? We've talked a bit about the experiential weeks and sociocracy. What other things did you see?
Towards the end, I went to Dharma in Italy and I took the EcoVillage
Mm.
Design Education course. And that course teaches about 4 different domains, which are the worldview, the social, economic, and the aspects. What I saw as probably the most important was the worldview. You still can't do it without the social, ecological, right? You need
Mm.
all of it. However, when people are aligned around their worldview, all the rest can happen. I wanted to make the difference between eco-village and intentional community. So often those terms are interchangeable and they can both mean basically the same thing. However, there's a difference between an eco-village or intentional community that's built purely around ecological principles. In other words, we're going to use permaculture, we're building real eco houses, we're really innovating in the ecological area. It's an eco housing development. Anyone can come and buy a house, they can live there,
Mm.
and so on. So it's much more
Mm.
traditional kind of community in that way. So an example of an eco village development would be, or eco housing development would be something closer to Witchcliffe, which is just south of Perth, Australia. And then you've got something all the way on the other end of intentional community, would be more like Damanhur, where it's people with a very specific worldview coming together to create community. So in order to do that, everybody that shows up needs to be aligned with that worldview. So Damanhur was around a fairly charismatic leader. That said, it's a space that has survived and is thriving beyond that leader having left the planet. It's a very spiritual community with a mission. It's about keeping the world on a positive track towards a positive future. And they believe in action, meditation, but you better be doing something in the world too to make
Mm.
this vision come true. And they've built the temples of humankind underground in a mountain that is stunning and spectacular. They build labyrinths and spirals, and it's starting to spread around the world now. So that's an intentional community there. Another example would be Tamera. They're now into innovating, and they do a lot of research along many different lines, including ecology. They have somebody who lives there that's a professor of optics, and they've built this big mirror, and the mirror is the power for cooking in one of their kitchens.
Mm.
And they also use biogas. They are world leading in water retention, building those massive water retention ponds. And what that does is reignites the water cycle properly so that you end up like now, they have enough water in a region where it might not rain for 6 months of the year. Even if it doesn't rain for 3 years, they have water still. And they made a film called Water is Love about
Mm.
how the water cycle from groundwater up to cloud and into ocean and all the way back, restoring that water cycle could be a game changer for climate change. So that's what I mean by a strong ethos, a strong worldview, and a strong mission. The ones that go beyond just being ecological seem to have been the most long-lived, like the main ones in the world.
Mm.
Findhorn,
Mm.
Tamara, Damanhur, Oroville is about welcoming and being with all people of all beliefs, which
Oh,
is in India.
some of these or most of these eco villages have, it seems like worldview and mission could be similar, a value set, but the value set, as you were saying, is what's a belief if it's not going to be manifest in some sort of action.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
eco villages do both. They're like those who are attracted to be in this eco village have this worldview or belief system. They want to do action in the world, whether that be inviting others to learn or taking some innovation. Maybe that's one of the definitions that really defines an eco village under what would the Global Eco Village Network define, other than what you were saying is more like an eco estate or an eco community, which has a lot of sustainability values in building technique, etc. But it doesn't necessarily have its mission. All the people there are not attracted to something
Yeah,
other than just how am I going to be as a resident here and live my life.
that's exactly what's out there. And they're two very different things. They both have value, I think. It's much better to build ecologically sustainable villages where people basically just live their lives. They buy their house, buy their land, whatever, and just get on
Mhm.
with life as usual. They all have
Mhm.
value. For me, I'm much more into the intentionality of a specific mission and view of the
Mm.
world that goes beyond ecology. That said, ecology is actually the easiest part because it's black and white at this point. We
Mhm.
know what not to do in terms of building buildings and looking after the land. And we have a lot of options of what to do. To grow food, we're going to use permaculture and build a food forest. But of course, permaculture isn't just about growing food, it's like your whole
Mhm.
land plan. And that's how it's going to become self sustaining after a while. One thing I was very surprised at, Zola, is how few places are aiming at food sovereignty. Tamara does a good job in that they're also feeding 3,000 visitors a year. So that
Mm.
means that they're producing 20% of the fruit, the vegetables and things on their
Mm.
land, but it's 20% of enough to feed that many visitors. So if something happened, they could quickly move to having more of that, all of that going to everybody that lives there. And they
Mm.
also source most of the rest from local growers. It's good.
Good.
Many that I talked to, it just wasn't a focus. Porg was built on this idea of having a free democratic education for children. It was founded by parents who wanted their children educated in ways that were open to their passions, to bringing
Mm.
out what's within them, to supporting them in exploring the world and being able to dive deeply into what interests them, etc., and empowering them and teaching them emotional intelligence and physical fitness and all of it. When I say grow up in the village, I don't mean it's like closed doors to the world cult type thing at all. It's just that rather than send them out into the traditional schools where they're actually not learning how to live ecologically and how to have emotional intelligence and so on. So,
Mm.
of course, that would be their worldview. That's the glue that keeps them together, is that desire. And on that land, they've got plenty of land, and it's ironic, actually, because they're deeply devoted, dedicated to working in your passion, right? That's a lot of what's behind the democratic
Mm.
education for the children,
Mm.
is helping them find and work in right livelihood that fills them not just with money, because it's from their hearts. And since right now, nobody's really feeling to do the food growing thing, nobody's doing it. I've listened to that and I think that's a pretty important piece right now. And it's probably one of the first things we'll do at Neighborhood. Even if it were not my favorite thing to do, I would
Mm.
be willing to do some hours to make sure we have a food plan. They've been open about 6 years now and they have pretty good programs and it's a very interesting piece. And then the Sant Kamal place, their relationship with food is astonishing. The food they made us was absolutely
Mm.
incredible in the detail. And they were teaching a lot about love in action, the 7 essentials of living together as a collective. One of them was being love in action. And in their creation of our meals, you could see that they were beautiful and delicious.
So going back to the theme of resilience, what creates that longevity, that
Mhm.
stickness, and also thriving? What are some other themes that you saw that these eco villages are doing?
Justice, equity, and shared decision making are
Mm.
huge so that people feel included and
Mm.
that helps them to work together. And then obviously the economics is always foundational in terms of survival and thriving. So there needs to be thought into how to start and continue economically. I went to the Global EcoVillage Network gathering in Sweden, and there was a group there from France called Lebre, and passage is a word passage in English. But in French, if you break it up into 2 words, you end up with lettre, which means the wise steps. They have an economic model that does over time create economic independence from the matrix and that makes startup much, much easier the way it's structured. And they also call it systemic
Mm,
aikido because
mm,
you're using the system to get out of the system. It's a beautiful model that Neighborhood is investigating and probably installing soon, where it has, for example, there's a piece called ethical savings. So there's a lot of people around that have a bunch of money and it might be sitting in savings accounts or somewhere, and they want something good to do with it. With an ethical savings model, they can deposit that money on a basis of, you can get X amount of it back at any one time and over a year, this maximum, so that the village can't suddenly, but nobody's suddenly taking out a massive sum. And in the meantime, that money's used to create the community and you're doing some good with it. And it's backed by the value of the land that you're buying. So it's actually a really safe place to put it. If the project fails, well, if they bought the land, then you just sell the land and they get the money back. So it's pretty secure. And that's just a small piece of it. It really offers a great model. They've already helped 46 plus communities get started with this model. So it's really proven. I got to witness a really beautiful community discussion that was real. And this was where they were coming together to discuss what next steps were economically. They're making quite a bit from their courses and things. And it's not enough. So what are we going to do? And they were talking about going outside to make extra money, but always keeping in mind we must do things that we enjoy, that we love to do. The economics too is something that can be developed. And what I see, Zola, that's so exciting, back to these network of networks, is that what we're actually doing in the eco-village movement is building the capacity to exist alongside the mainstream systems to where at some point we'll have our own matrix built and our own economies, internal and external, facing other eco-village communities and the outside world, but not dependent on it. That's the positive future. And it means unhooking from the negative timeline.
And it's practice what it is to live the way that we believe is a more peaceful, harmonious, abundant way. It could be a project like a community garden that has a lot of reciprocity. These eco villages are really trying to be a place-based living with all these different projects around. So like that community garden, rather than living in suburbia and having to transport oneself to that lovely community garden project, it's like, well, why can't I just have that kind of out my back door? And then why can't my neighbor be one that already has an idea to share resources without me feeling like I'm intruding to ask if I can borrow a tool or share babysitting or something? EcoVillage is sort of a conglomeration of a lot of those ideas in one. Even if someone doesn't want to live in an eco-village because that's maybe a little too much, I still think then just being involved and finding your community of some interesting alternative way of doing, whether it be economics or an ecological system or a social system. Like in my area, there's people doing savings pools where they're bypassing the bank as a way of putting their money in savings, and they're saving it within each other. That's practicing a different economic system based on trust and relationships. And that's how that money is able to be kept, by giving it not to the bank and institution, but the others in the group hold that.
I really love what you said about you can grow some vegetables. It's a revolutionary act in today's world. To grow a source of healthy food, you know where it's come from. There's 0 miles attached to it. You don't have to use poisonous chemicals to kill all the bugs, and you are supporting your own physical health. The savings pool thing is wonderful, and that's the big thing about it. There's no interest. And these kinds of innovations can happen on a small scale, large scale. It actually is more. I think you're spot on it. It is more about creating tons and tons of tiny little bubbles that get bigger than necessarily, oh, I have to go and start a whole big network of eco-villages. That might sound overwhelming. We can all do our own little thing in our home base, wherever that is, to embrace these. And it strikes me too, here listening to you, that in order for that to happen, there's also a call to humanity right now to stand up and take responsibility. There's no more time to wait for the other people to do it, to wait for the government, to sit around thinking we're going to be saved by the government. It's not happening. So every step we take, whether it's join a savings pool or grow a garden, is another step towards a positive future that we're aiming at. And that's a beautiful thing, to think that we actually have the power to do it, right? So from what I've seen, I'd say that eco-village movement is into its second wave. So one thing we've learned is the importance of maintaining a structure, but also making structures that are flexible and can grow and change as the needs of the village change, right? And that's one of the beautiful pieces about decentralized power, is that decision making is being made much closer to the people where the decisions are directly affecting. And if you think about it, New Zealand's a very small country. I mean, 5 million people is still a lot of people. And here, the idea that one relatively small group of people based in Wellington in this funny shaped building called the Beehive can make effective decisions for all 5 million people living 5 million different lives in multiple different ways of life, from extremely rural to city, and that's actually going to be effective is kind of ridiculous. It's not working. We see that. So then you can look at the smaller eco-villages and see how they are very adaptable. So we can take that and learn from that. They're adapting to change. They're able to do that. Another piece that we've seen with these longer existing villages is that they're also, a lot of them 40, 50 years old. So the original founders are on their way out and the new generations coming in. So we're seeing there's actually quite a tension in many of them around that and how to navigate that. And because the young people coming in maybe want to make big changes, which is what generations do. Learning how to allow for that, letting go of control and allowing things to evolve and the vision to grow are really important lessons we can learn from seeing how they navigate these together.
It's what creates the unraveling.
Yeah, obviously, if economically you end up without being able to sustain yourself. So not focusing enough on having the internal economy that's also outward facing, like what businesses you're going to have and how you're going to run those. Also sharing of that money and how you look after everybody and addressing economic disparity between people coming in. That's actually one of the things Le Passage does really, really well, because it offers the economic model I spoke of earlier. It offers a way for, over time, the inputs of people equalizing. So let's say you have somebody come in who's got a home, but not much cash flow. They want to live in communities. They want to come in and live. So they're ready to sell their house, and their house is, I don't know, 300,000. So now they want to put 300,000 into the community, but then they won't have much cash flow. The other people that live there, that want to come and live there, that don't have any capital, they can come in and they'll be paying weekly. So they come in, and now you've got people paying in monthly, and this person that's put in their 300,000, they're actually able to withdraw. Remember I said you can withdraw a certain amount of money per month or per year if you put your money into the Passage model. So she's withdrawing what she wants for life, which means that her 300,000 is gradually going down, while the other people putting the money in on a monthly basis, the smaller amounts, that's going up. So eventually it goes like this. And over time, you end up with a situation where there is economic parity, which is beautiful. Now, why is that important? When I went to Byron Bay, I met Helena Norberg Hodge, who founded Local Futures, and I read her book called Local Futures, and it talks a lot about GDP and GNH, right? GDP, for people that don't know, I mean, we all know the letters, but what does that actually mean and what does it measure? It measures every transaction that happens within the country. And it doesn't matter what the transaction is. It could be for treating cancer or for developing new pesticide, or it could be for, new groundbreaking, beautiful food that's very healthful, et cetera, et cetera. The Point is, whether the money is exchanging hands for something that feeds us and makes us healthier, more prosperous, or because we've all got cancer and we have to pay for medical treatments, it's all transactions. That's a bit of a problem because it's not differentiating. In the Kingdom of Bhutan, they had gross national happiness, their king. They had the benevolent dictator, which we've all thought for a long time is probably the best way of governance, right? Problem with power, though, we all know. So he said, right, let's not measure by GDP. Let's do gross national happiness. So he does that. And they install this. Now we're going to develop a system whereby we measure our success by how happy and fulfilled our people are. Fast forward, I'm in India. While I'm planning my India tour, I knew I was going to go up north. I wanted to visit Vandana Shiva's farm and take a course on Gandhi's triple peace there. Then I went to Navdanya farm, and I didn't get to meet Vandana Shiva because she wasn't well. But I did get to meet Satish Kumar, who's beautiful. And I met the Janparat leadership, beautiful Wahine women, Sumit and Meena, who invited me. Janparat is Global EcoVillage Network India organization that's really getting up and started now. And they ended up inviting me to this thing called, I'm going to crucify this word, Satat Samalan, up in Shimla, up in the Himalayas. This was a meeting of all the movers and shakers in sustainability in our region, the ones in academics and the ones in government and so forth, coming together to talk about sustainability. So off I go and get there. And in walks this man in these orange robes. And he gets introduced as a Bhutani monk from the Kingdom of Bhutan. I was so excited that he might know something about gross national happiness. So I went over to him. So we go out into the garden, we have a chat. Not only does he know about it, he helped develop it. He worked high up in the government. He knew the king and the prime minister. He told me the story. He said in 2017, the government decided to do 5 things for the people. One of them was to build roads. We succeeded in all 5 things. And when we built the roads, it was a disaster for gross national happiness. Why? What happened is now these villages where everybody had about the same stuff, very similar life. Now, all of a sudden, with a road there, the person actually, for whatever reason, had more money in the background, suddenly buy a car because now they could drive it and have appliances delivered. So now within the village, suddenly there's this disparity. Like now this wealth that couldn't actually really be seen before was seen, and it created division and dissatisfaction and envy and a sense of us and them. That was the moment when he told me that story where I finally understood why disparity of income is so damaging in community, right? The price is too high, right? This idea of hoarding money and having so much more than other people, it's something that eco-villages are aiming to resolve. And I think it's something that's being done quite well because most of them are not giving more voice to people just because they have more money.
I'd like to take a brief moment to share with you about Common Ground, the consulting agency to provide professional services to enable more affordable, socially connected, resilient, and climate-adaptive housing and neighborhood development and place-based living. So Common Ground works with local government, with community housing providers, with for-purpose developers, and with groups of people wishing to lead their own housing initiatives. We provide services in housing strategy, design and facilitation of meaningful community engagement, research, policy development, training in new approaches to better housing outcomes. We also provide services in workplace culture and communication to create more cohesive and effective working teams and workplaces. So why work with Common Ground? Well, we take a whole systems and innovative approach. We have decades of experience in community and regenerative development. We have compassionate work culture. We're aligned with community engagement best practices of IAP2. Our knowledge is research-based, and we work with a spirit of joy, creativity, and collaboration. You can visit our website at commonground.net.nz to learn more about our services, to get 2 reports that we've written on housing for women and the community land trust model, and please sign up for our weekly newsletter for inspirational resources, links to case studies that showcase successful initiatives and policies, and get announcements to upcoming events.
There's equal voice, and that's a beginning. But the passage model actually does, over time, create parity, which is beautiful. When I saw it, that's when I really fell in love with it, especially after this adventure with gross national happiness.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Economic equality, a lot of people have this idea that if someone's doing well, they've got more merit and they've worked harder and they've been more honest, all these other qualities which equate to more money. And if you don't have as much money, you don't have those values. And that's so not true, but that's the way our society sets it up. So we accept this economic inequality because there's those that don't deserve it. And actually, it's quite the opposite. In many cases, you speak to people who've got a lot of money, and it's like, what are you doing with all this money and how did you get it? And others who've been working so hard and being generous, who are just making ends meet. So I love how that eco-village idea of finding ways to value people's contributions in other ways than financial, and that there's this model that allows for that to be a system. It's not just a free for all that if you come with a lot or if you come with a little, we'll make it work, but it actually has a system, can be built over time, because that's really what you want, is not just for everybody to be equally just making it or on the bread line. You actually want community wealth building, so you don't want to devalue wealth, but we want to look at other forms of identifying what wealth is and can look like, and looking at ways to continue to raise that community wealth.
Exactly. To all go together, right? Holding hands and moving forward together. And it's really beautiful. So I think that's things, it's far from perfect. And the will is there and the desire is there to create more equitable, just way of life. Right. One innovation in economics I saw was at Traditional Dream Factory, the OASA network, the 100,000 hectares of regenerated land, and their token is backed by nature. So you talk about currency being backed by gold, or these days currencies are backed by nothing, which is why they can keep creating money endlessly, infinitely out of thin air, because there's nothing behind it. So it doesn't have to be tagged to anything of value. It's just digits on a screen, pretty much, right? Money. A lot of people still don't understand that. The money you're being lent by the bank for your mortgage that you're now going to spend 30 years paying for literally didn't exist until they typed it into the computer to issue it as a credit, which is actually debt. This coin, because it's backed by the land, as you regenerate the land and make it more desirable for people to live there, because it gets more and more beautiful and the structures are beautiful and so on, right? Remember I said you're buying residency when you buy their token. The token becomes worth more because it's more desirable to live there. So people are willing to pay more to live there. It just makes total sense.
What I'm hearing is that land value is truly based on the nature that is there, rather than current land value is valued. Nothing natural has happened on that land for the most part. And in fact, it could even be denigrated. It could be that more has been done to ruin it with poisons or overgrazing. And yet that land can still raise in value, even though the natural capital is less, versus what I'm hearing you say is, yes, land can increase in value, but it's only when the natural systems of more food abundance or soil fertility or water retention, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And OASA, I left out a little piece. OASA is buying degenerated land to begin with and regenerating it. So the first one at TDF was an old chicken factory and the soil was pretty exhausted. They're doing a lot of planting. They're not far from Tamara, actually, one train stop away, and they've learned the water retention stuff. And a lot of places I visited were very aware of Tamara's work with water retention. In the innovation space, this is where eco-villages are coming in. And you're starting to see now universities starting to partner with eco-villages, because the eco-villages are doing research in social, ecological things, everything across the board. Yeah. And now there's even a project starting in India that is a university looking to see how they can function as though they were an eco-village. Future of universities, which are being reinvented as we speak, because the model is obsolete. Yeah.
We were talking about some of those challenges or the unraveling factors. I've heard you say that in the other part, which was around people coming in an adult state of maybe emotional regulation or emotional intelligence. For me, I've seen that quite a bit as the unraveling bits, which falls under that social dimension of people moving away from maybe, the conventional society. It's that moving away from. And maybe they had some trauma in their childhood that they haven't identified or that hasn't been fully healed. So I find that there's a lot of people who get attracted to an eco village or an intentional community, but they're moving away from, not having resolved their stuff, hoping to find some healing or ease in being in an eco village, when actually one needs an incredibly evolved sense of emotional intelligence and life experience to be a positive, really positively contributing, because it is an organization as well as a place to live. It's also a business. So really to be able to be within all three at the same time, an organization, a business, and a neighborhood or residential. Wow, that takes like 3 levels of emotional maturity and adult way of being. Even though people are in an adult body, they could very well be carrying around in fact, a lot of leaders that we're seeing in the world at the moment are stuck in 5-year-old emotional developmental bodies. So,
Growing up like that.
in
And
terms
I
of
just want to
anything
say,
else, yep.
when you're doing the in and out onboarding, then it becomes really important. This idea, like, 'cause as you say, a lot of people can show up and they're running away from the old system rather than running towards creating something beautiful. Yeah. So this is where we go back to that worldview and that relates to onboarding, right? So if an eco village doesn't have a good onboarding system, making it hard to get in and easy to get out, meaning if somebody shows up, and there are narcissists in this world, there are people that don't care about things, that are sociopaths, right? And if they show up in your village and you have no way to get them out, they can literally destroy it. Sometimes we might not be able to be nice and all inclusive, right? And the way we can ensure this an equitable way and a just way of doing this is to have really robust systems of welcoming people, introducing them to who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, periods of them living there for a while before they become members, and so on, to make sure that not only does it work for us to have them there, but it works for them to be there, right? This is what they want, and that they are into creating this community. And if you have that in place, then you've got far more chance of succeeding. Of course, it's bound to have teething problems. Of course, we're going to fail. But what we're doing is failing our way forward. We're learning from every so-called failure what doesn't work. And once you know what doesn't work, it's much easier to start figuring out how to make it work. And that's what we're seeing in this second wave, is things like the passage model, things like there's another one, Muse in France, offering an economic model. We're seeing that no rules isn't really good. And so now we're looking at sociocracy, but then sociocracy has another piece of holocracy, which is very similar. I call them kissing cousins, which rather than circle-based is more role-based. But the thing that most of these systems being used now have in common is that they can evolve and grow. People are taking the template of, we'll just stick to sociocracy. Here's sociocracy, here's how it works. Now we can tweak it to work in our community. This is what we're seeing in the eco-village world, is taking all the different pieces and making it bespoke to our situation and using pieces and methods and systems that can grow and evolve. And that's the biggest downfall, in my opinion, of mainstream culture, is that the systems are too entrenched. They cannot adapt. And we are living in times where we have to adapt and pivot rapidly, right? Look at this thing about climate change. Wherever you are in climate change, belief, not belief, 20, 25 years now, they've been meeting yearly, COP, making agreements. Has it helped? What have we actually done? Within 7 years, with the knowledge we have about ecology, with the effort, we know what to do. We're just not doing it, right? Because those systems aren't set up. That's why we have to do it ourselves. I'm not sitting around waiting for them.
Well, what I'm seeing is that there's an emergence of ways of learning that we can't get in a conventional school or quite often even in a university. Some universities are integrating some of these concepts. There might be a course within a department or a wider degree. But there are these other opportunities, whether it be at an eco-village, having an immersion experience. The Global Eco-Village Network offers courses, and the Eco-Village Design Education, a month-long immersion in these different dimensions. Gaia Education, which offers things within those dimensions kind of separately that can be done online. There's the Foundation for Intentional Communities, which some can be eco-villages, but they offer a lot of these, again, dimensional, whether it be financial or social, legal, how to age in community. There's so many things that can be now gotten from around that people can choose how they want to learn. Obviously, the experiential is probably the most dynamic because you're learning it all and you're getting a chance to feel how it works. But people can at least get started. There's also books that have been written. You mentioned Local Futures. And the one I find quite useful is called Creating a Life Together by Diana Leaf Christian, who actually asked that question: why have 90% of the startup intentional communities and eco-villages failed? And why have the 10% succeeded? And she then breaks down. So yeah, there's books that people can read that help them to not do the things that have unraveled other communities. But I think the experiential thing I'd recommend if people have a chance to, well, either travel or look around within their own country. Well, we do have some versions of.
We know many. Do you know of any that are really doing those kinds of things in New Zealand?
TUI community, I would say, is the only one that's
Some
quite
degree. They have an
active on a regular
experience.
basis.
They have a 6-week intern kind of thing, right? Yeah, which is
Yeah,
really
and
good.
it helps economically because people from the community who live there can say, oh, this is my skill, I'd like to offer this, and get paid. That's probably the most active one that I know of that is an intentional community. Riverside, where I'm living, doesn't have anything for the community itself, but people can learn about ecology here, and there's people that use the space of Riverside to offer different learning opportunities. So it's a different way of looking at it. So still something interesting, the most interesting home that you have visited or been in.
I think what I'll actually talk about for that is actually Riverside Community, where you live. It's one of the most interesting places I've ever lived. I found it really interesting because of the total sharing model, which I haven't seen anywhere else. People freeze any extra assets they have rather than giving it all to the community to create parity, which we've talked about quite a bit, and how the land is collectively owned, the homes, everything there, it's all owned by the community. Any work people do in the businesses, the money from the businesses goes into the community and everybody gets some money each week. You have access to a car, you've got a home, your bills are paid, everything.
And lastly, how can people find you or connect with
Yeah,
you?
maybe I'm on Facebook and there's only one Zahra Lightway, Zahra, or Zahra, but also LinkedIn there, on the neighborgood.earth website as well. And actually very soon I'm launching my new business, which is Lightway Learning, which is a home educator certification course for US-based parents. My mission is quite similar to the Ecovillages Tours, where I want to help families and children find freedom in education and learning. And this is about training them to feel confident and competent to do so, and to deliver a really rich and enriching experience in learning for their kids. And so you'll be able to find me eventually at Lightway Learning. And that's mainly it. My email, Zahra Lightway at Gmail. It's easy.
So thank you
Okay.
for coming on to the show, Zahra, and much luck with your Lightway Learning business and with the development of the neighborhood EcoVillage.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Zola.
There's actually a lot of resources that you can check out. There is the Global EcoVillage Network, which has regions around the world. Where I am, it is called Genoa, the Global EcoVillage Network, Oceania, Australasia. You might have an EcoVillage near where you live, or perhaps like Zahra, you might like to make a holiday visiting EcoVillages. Well, here's some sites that you can check out to learn more. There's the Global EcoVillage Network, ecovillages.org, EcoVillage Tours at EcoVillageTours.com. And if you want to take courses, then you can go to Gaia Education, which offers the EDE at GaiaEducation.org, and the Foundation for Intentional Community at IC.org. We'll have all these links, as well as the ones referred to in the episode, in the show notes.